Hey guys, I have some books to talk about with you guys today. Okay, we have The Devil is Fine by John Bircher. We have The Place Where They Buried Your Heart by Christina Henry. The Shape of Dreams by April Reynolds. And When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. Now, I did post quick reviews on my Instagram. So if you just want something quick, you can go there and see my quick little 30-second thoughts or minute thoughts and see my rating. Because these were all over the place when it comes to ratings. I mean, everything was above 3 stars, but some is 3.5, 3.75, 4.5. Like, I don't know. I just enjoyed them, but for vastly different reasons. Now, I was originally going to use these books as my like two for Tuesday. And then I just fell behind in doing my two for Tuesdays, which is life, right? I just haven't really been feeling as drawn to sharing content and making things explicitly for the purpose of content. So having a little separation from it and just being able to get on here and talk about the books I love means something more to me, and I had to just sit with that for a little bit. But anyways, I had them pair for two for Tuesday, so I did kind of have books that are sharing a common thread or theme. So with When No One Is Watching and Alyssa Cole and The Shape of Dreams, these two by April Reynolds, these two books are more about community. And not to say there's no community in these other books, because there is, but I think these really focus in, and I think I know they focus in on Black community in different times. Now, The Shape of Dreams does read very like current. It feels very current, and that's saying something because it's occurring during the 80s crack epidemic in East Harlem. So you have a lot of texture in this book, a lot of characters, a lot of depth. Nothing in this book is really simple. The relationships are complex. I mean, you have Twin, who is, trying to find her way in the community and wants to be, and is seen kind of as the little bit of conscience that exists within this community. And she is kind of in this family business, and her family runs a crack den. They run a rugged drug den. And she is seeing people from the community, the people who maybe were attending church with her at one point, the people who are going through it in their own way, people who she buys from the grocery, shops at the grocery store, coming in and out of this crack den. And I think her as a character is very complex, and there's a lot of nuance to her character, but it shows so much of being involved in both of these spaces. This space where it, can we question whether or not this crackdown was needed as part of the community, create a safe space for people to use these drugs. And in some way, the inevitability of the way the drugs were brought into these spaces and the destruction that they, played a part in. But it's also interesting to see her kind of see this and be able to see them. And without seeing this, she would, I don't think, have come to the position that she came to within the community and wanting to kind of be a part of fighting back this justice. And then you have Wanda, who is the friend of, I think it's Anita, who's the mother. Well, Wanda and Anita are actually both mothers, but Anita's son has been found dead and was actually found by Twin. And so then we have Wanda, who is, her son is kind of constantly being caught in and caught up by the police. So in the whole story throughout this like book, you're kind of navigating the complexities again of what the community is. The community is its own like breathing beast as well, because in some ways, when we say community, we're talking about the physical people that make it up. And that's what I think is really strong in this book. Whereas the community, the physical community of itself, is also kind of neglecting the people, the very people that support and that keep it there. And these people, you can see, don't always feel seen within the physical community. And so they've had to make their own community within that physical space, if that makes any sense to y'all. But I think what really works well in this book is that conversation and the larger conversation of what it means to be a part of something and want justice, and what does justice really look like. And especially when we're talking about working as one and supporting as one, that doesn't always just mean, finding and hunting down who committed this crime, because it's part like a mystery as well, trying to solve who killed this person. But I think in true fashion, sometimes the person that you have found to be the killer is someone that you also need to defend. And doesn't mean defending in a way that they get off with it, that they get away with it, but it's realizing that why this person did what they did, and how the community, the larger, the physical community, plays a part in shaping the shape of dreams, shaping the dreams these person had and altering them to a way that they had to figure, that they feel like they had to fit into the mold that was created. And that mold is really constraints and restrictions that have now changed what these dreams look like. And for some of the characters in this book, their dream is just to get out. We see this with unfortunately, the boy who was murdered, and how he has this love of libraries and reading and saying, and he really does stay out of trouble. Sorry if you see the camera move, I just bumped the table, but my knee. But you know, he just wants to, I'm hanging in there. He just wants to be free, right? He wants to be able to escape what he sees on a regular day basis. And there's others whose dream is to do the same, but maybe their dream is a little bit larger and winning stardom. And how these things can shift and shape, and then again, all these relationships in between. I think one of the most interesting characters here is Anita and Wanda and their relationship as friends. And then Anita's having this kind of, balancing of Wanda being her friend, the trouble that Wanda can kind of sometimes bring into her life, and then how they're both using crack, and how crack has been kind of, it's something that has now become part of them, but they're trying to unravel themselves from. While also balancing, seeing Wanda's son get arrested the way he does, and we know, the target that's put on the backs of like young Black men, and specifically in these spaces. But reconciling with the fact that her son is alive and her son is dead. The son that did all the right things, right? All the right things. And he was by all chances, a good child, right? But who's to say what's a good child in a place that is meant to actively shape you and restrict who you can and could be? And then we have people like Morning and the Reverend Carl, and they're all kind of connected by the fact that they all used to attend this church. And I think there's a level of resilience here that's unmatched. Resilience to be heard, resilience to seek justice, resilience to support. And we see that with Reverend Carl. But I think with Reverend Carl, you also recognize that, you know, words are dangerous, but more than sometimes weapons are. And the way that you go and actively seek justice from the pressure that that's being put on you, because you positioned yourself as a leader in this space, can sometimes backfire. And then being a leader in this space can also mean other things. And I think it's a really good testament and conversation around the fact that even these people that maybe are of the cloth, right, or these people who have had this connection to these religious values and the platforms that they create for themselves, that they also have dreams for themselves that they would like to be cast and seen as a certain light. There's a moment in the book that I think is kind of not like quickly brush over, but I think it's intentional that it's slid in there, because it's adding focus to the fact that even with Carl being the one that people trust and go to and wanting to kind of have these talks and these discussions, he himself he almost would like to be shot. He almost like to be taken out, because he wants to be a martyr. He wants to be this name that's everlasting in this space and a community that where things don't always last, where people are dying, where things are being taken advantage of. And so it's interesting to kind of see that. And there's a complexity around his character that I think is just really interesting, as well as the conversation around motherhood, and that it's not always this, it's like very sweet relationship of being a mom and having a child and wanting to support them and showing up for them. It's confusion. It's not always knowing how to show up for them. It's also balancing your own existence outside of your child's, and then a deep reflection on what people consider to be a good mother. And we see this conversation with Anita, who is really putting so much on herself, right, because of her own addictions and the setting in which she's had to raise her child, and the way that she feels she has failed her child, and the way she knows people with even in her space and community will look at her as a failure because she has not been able to protect her child. And so you have a lot of just conversations around that, especially that with motherhood and use of drugs, and that's going to be hard. I think that's what kind of makes this more complex read, is because of that. There's so many conversations that are being held here, and different people that you can easily visualize and hang on to. And the author does an amazing job of putting you in that time, like putting you back during the 80s academic, where you were seeing people lose their lives, where you're seeing people result to this because they were having other failures or other things in their life that they considered to be failures, and they were seeing no little way out. But there is this thread of hope that exists within these pages regardless. And I think resilience and hope here are the big key takeaways. So I don't want anyone to feel like it's just a negative book. It's not that. There's something there. And I think that's what is just why this book to me was really successful in its delivery of it. Now, I will say the execution, outside the delivery of the themes and messages of this book, I think the execution and writing here is great, but the way it's formatted kind of threw me off, and I really wish that they would have done it in a different way. Now, with that being said, the way this formatted is kind of disjointed and drawing, and you're sometimes you're shifting POVs in the same chapter, and you're like, wait, is this the past? Is the present? Like, where are we at? And I do think that that's intentional in the way that, you know, when these people are using these drugs, they're losing days, like they're losing time. Things are happening, progress is happening, setbacks are happening. All these things are occurring at once, and there's a lot of miscommunication and in general that exists. So I feel like the pacing of it will seem uneven, but it also kind of coincides with the feeling of it existing in this place where um things that are major are happening but often overlooked. The things that are given credit, and like there's the constant kind of bringing up of like the Mets and the up and down and falls of the Mets, and how that kind of correlates to that of the neighborhood, and the way that we can be so supportive and have this energy of, you know, uplifting a community and connecting that to sports. But when there's a body found dead, or when, you know, we see that this, what the drug den, and we see people coming out of it, we know that there's that there is help needed here, that we don't blink an eye the same way we would for, you know, someone hit, like having a great first run, or having a really close knit game, you know. So I think that was really interesting as well, and makes me think of today about the way that we can rise up for certain things, even when it comes to being online and engaging in spaces online where people can easily get behind a stranger, but let it be something in their neighborhood and they know nothing about it, right? So that was an interesting kind of part of this reading experience as well. But I think if it was me, and I really, like, if I could change anything, I might have told this through um like interconnected short stories, where maybe we start with the church and how the church burns down, and how the church was a space for all these people to gather and unite, and then having to kind of build this new church in unlikely places and spaces, and how this, again, this sort of hope, and not just physical, not physical community, but the community of people is still there along the way, even if there's flaws in these people, who are all have their own flaws and their own issues and concerns, and even then there's distancing between these people, that there's still a way to kind of come back, and how this person, not really even just the the church or the idea of religion, but this person, the reverend, is able to kind of be a center force. And even though he represents the center force at large, you could say that Daryl, you could say that these other people in the community are also central forces, in the way that, whether it's their death or the way that they step up, becomes something that people can look up to and stay hopeful about. So I think if I was, again, if I was me, I would have preferred it to have those different um interconnected stories, where maybe we talk about the community and the church burning down from the physical communities, like the settings perspective, and what these buildings see, then going into Carl and his life, and his view of the village, and not, I say village, but this village and community space after the burning down of this of the church, and this recreation of this gathering space, and the women that enter his life, and the way that women are such a huge part of communal effort and support and uplifting, even if they're going to make you you know, they're going to drag you through it first and remind you, you know, what you need to be doing, what you shouldn't have been doing, that they are still there to end up, like, you know, dry you off, warm you up, and give you what you need to get to where you're going to go. So I would have loved to have those interconnected stories. Anita, Wanda, Twin, Morning, Daryl. Like, I think that would have been really Tyrone, who is the boy, the 12-year-old boy who ends up murdered. I think that would have been really interesting and spreading the story out. And then also his killer, that could have been great, because I think having the interconnected stories would allow you to always come back with the story of the, again, the physical community, and sharing its perspective of everything it's seeing, and a more clean tied together. But I do think April Knows was very intentional with her pacing, because it's not meant to be a clean time tied together. This is not really, it's non-linear, right? So I think that's intentional way that she did it. I just, for me, would have liked it if it was told a little bit differently. So that is my little rant on the Shape of Dreams. Now we are going to talk about When No One Is Watching. Okay, let's get into it. So now we have When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. And I enjoyed this, but I think for me, it was a little bit predictable. And then towards the end, it just kind of ramps up with the pacing. There's a lot of time spent kind of building this relationship between Sydney and her neighbor across the way, Theo. Now, I can read the back of the book really quickly for you, which I should have done for Shape of Dreams, but besides the point, we'll read it here, okay? It says, Sydney Green is Brooklyn born and raised, but her beloved neighborhood seems to change every time she blinks. Condos are sprouting up like weeds, for sale signs are popping up overnight, and the neighbors she's known all of her life are disappearing. To hold on to her community's past and present, Sydney channels her frustration into a walking tour and finds an unlikely and unwanted assistant and one of the new arrivals to the block, her neighbor Theo. But Sydney and Theo's deep dive into history quickly becomes a dizzying descent into paranoia and fear. The neighbors may not have moved to the suburbs after all, and the push to revitalize the community may be more deadly than advertised. When does coincidence become conspiracy? Where do people go when gentrification pushes them out? Can Sydney and Theo trust each other or themselves long enough to find out before they too disappear? Okay, so there's gonna be a little spoiler alert with this one. Okay, I'm just gonna have to let y'all know. Sydney has got a lot going on. She is just trying to get by. She's trying to save her mom's house. And I think the reason why this really stuck out to me is being so close to DC. And really, when you're in any kind of major city and you have certain kind of structures of homes, and you see a lot of families, specifically Black families, poor families, people of color, right? All those things are people, with marginalized communities, all those different things, different categories of people being pushed out, being charged out of their homes, having land stolen from them. This is happening right now in multiple cities, where they're using any illegal method they can find and little cracks and holes, to take property from people. This is also, you'll see a lot of this when people come in and they offer someone a big fat check, and this might be the most money they've seen come across their hands in a long time or ever in their life, but they come in and then they sell that property for like 4 times that. And I think it comes with this lack of information and knowledge of what it is to preserve and how powerful it is to own something, and how a lot of older people haven't necessarily passed that down to younger people, which is why I do think a lot of us rent now, a lot of us, and there's nothing wrong with renting, but how in general, even houses, right? There's a lack of ownership of so many things around today, and how we kind of have to work together to fight and combat that. And we see that here in this book. Now, Sydney, like I said, there's a lot of time kind of focused on building this relationship between Sydney and Theo. Sydney wants to, protect her community, and she's doing this through a walking tour. It's a great way to kind of preserve history and share information about these different places in the community that are very historical in the work that they've done, or just have a very significant meaning that may be overlooked, right? And why it's needed to preserve her community. Um, Again, the community here is similar to the Shape of Dreams, is its own character, but in this sense, it's one that we're seeing kind of be kidnapped the same way that people are disappearing. Her community is disappearing. The physical space of her community is disappearing. Is it in harm's way of being altered and changed, and how people can convince you that something is for the better and make you think it's for the better when it really isn't. So we see that people who are very like major parts of the community start to just again disappear. A well-known figure in the neighborhood who is known for his like summer bash, and not like a summer bash like it's just some crazy party, but it is a part of a neighborhood tradition, and how he just is just gone, and how they'll convince you, oh, this person came to town, and oh, this is why he's sick, he's ill, that's why he's not here. And so in comes somebody who you never met, guys as someone that they know, taking over their property, and all the while something's not right. I think it also does a great job of the paranoia and the gaslighting that occurs not only um, in the community itself, but online. We're having discussions, and it reminds me of groups like or apps like Nextdoor, where you go on Nextdoor and you hear people talking, and you're like, oh, that sounds a little. There's a little tone in that, interesting. Or the arguments you see people discussing, oh, we don't want this built here, we don't want this built here, and the energy and passion that some people will have around something but not this. The first incident in this book that kind of addresses that is when she meets Theo's wife, or girlfriend, or ex-girlfriend, who he's still like back with, and she has money. She has this like Karen encounter with her, where the girl is lying on Sydney, she's trying to make something bigger than it is, and Theo's kind of like, oh my god, he's over it, right? But he is still with her. And I think Theo's character in this book represents a lot of different things, but I also felt like I did not need Theo's perspective. I didn't need to only bounce between Theo and Sydney. I kind of wish the author in this book would have actually focused more on some of the other people in the neighborhood, specifically like the gentleman who was hosting the bash and ended up disappearing, and just other people as well. I think it was interesting to even see Sydney's mom's perspective, who, again, this is a spoiler, Sydney's mom is dead. She's been kind of passing it off as that the mom just isn't home, and she's answering the phone for her, while dodging these debt collectors and people who are trying to, take this house from her because she needs the money. She's trying to figure things out. And they know they're calling. They know something's not right. They're gonna send people by the house. They're trying to scare her out of this place. And all the while, her mom was sick. She passed away, and Sydney has buried her in the community garden, right? And it comes to a point where she kind of eventually reveals this to Theo, because they've got this connection. They hook up, they feel this drawing towards each other, and she feels like she can now trust Theo, because she didn't trust him at first when he offered to work on this project with her. But she feels like now he's starting to be more honest, and now she can be honest with him. And then when this body is like disrupted, it's moved, she realizes, well, maybe I can't. Well, she's like, can I not trust him? And she thinks that, maybe he's actually not like at all who she thought he was, that he is like his girlfriend or ex-partner at the time. Because before Theo's, she goes out of town. Well, she says she's going out of town. She has to handle some business, and that, Theo and her just don't work anymore. And he's kind of like, wait, what? You're breaking up with me? We just got this place together. And, she's over him, right? The vision that she has for this neighborhood is not what he has. And how she envisions herself in that space is not what he sees. She has no problem pushing other people out and stepping on people. And you end up finding out the connection of her and her father and his wealth and the company he operates, and how that is part of what's happening in the community. And so I think Theo's an interesting character because of all that he can represent with the naivete and being naive to the people around you and the people you keep company with, and how through that you also act as part of the problem. Because while he's over here lusting over Sydney, and maybe that lust turns into admiration. You could say that. You could argue not really. You could say it's a fetishization, and he's just been, he himself is a scammer and is able to get away with things that a Black woman, a Black person could not do. And is attracted to Sydney in a lens that is, I would say, you could argue that is not healthy, in a way that doesn't really help Sydney at all. But you could also say that he himself is having this like journey of growth and understanding of the complexities and nuance around what it is to exist in this space as a white man, and how he can use his power and privilege as just a white man. Whether it's him being a thief, a scammer, a fraud, whatever, but how he still has privilege that exists within his white body. And I think ultimately, again, I just did not need to hear as much from him. I don't think his character, I think while I understand all his character represents, I didn't need some of his just talks about how he's looking out his window, how annoyed he is with his girlfriend, but he's still there with her because he needs her money, right? I think if we're gonna have that kind of character, I would have had even more introspection into why he's there and his understanding of his existence. And again, not only kind of brushing off the fact that, again, he's part of the problem, because he's sitting in these spaces having these conversations and he's willing to say that's not right or that's not cool or whatever, but not enough to call it out in a way or communicate to the people of this neighborhood that these people are at risk. So he sits on this line of wanting to dip and dabble because he's attracted to Sydney and he's interested in learning more about this and the discovery of this information about the space, but isn't until the very end we see really start out to put himself out there. And I think it's because in that moment where Sydney finds the laptop, and she finds a laptop in their old apartment, and him and his ex's old apartment, and on there is, she realizes, oh, he's been a part of this, he's having conversations with these people, but really it's his ex-girlfriend's laptop, so it's not him that's the bad guy. But in that moment, he's able to realize, like, it was just as easy for Sydney to not trust him. All the work that he did to get her to trust him was gone in a second. So now he realizes I have to step up in a different way if I want to be taken seriously as an ally and advocate for this woman that I'm claiming to really like, right? But overall, when no one is watching, is a community and neighborhood story. It's talking about what it is when these systems and people come into a place that has its own unique history, its own tradition and values, and disrupts that and destroys it. And also the mind games, the gaslighting that is done. And we see this today again, like where people will convince you that you are crazy, you are insane. Like Sydney's going through it. She came from a previous relationship where he tried to convince her that she wasn't right, that she didn't know what she was talking about. So here it's like, once again, she's in this position where she's deemed to be crazy and she's questioning herself. She's paranoid. Are these people really going missing? Am I imagining this? And that is a tactic and technique used by these people who know that they can come in and alter and make you think that your perception of reality is being changed and altered in this moment. So I give really good kudos to Alexis Cole for kind of tackling a lot of different things. I just wish the story was a little bit differently. I think that highlighting the older generations, there's a moment in the book at the closer to the end where she comes in contact with the older generation, and they're like in the neighborhood, some two people who, mind you, they're mentioned but not a lot. So at the end it's kind of like, oh, we knew what was going on too, we saw something that was wrong too, but we as the older generation and you as the younger generation have different ways of handling these types of issues. I think that would have been an even better thing to focus on, and having their voices highlighted as chapters or as sections in the book as well, and just recognizing that they also caught on, but maybe the way that they're used to handling things is so vastly different and that they're struggling to find a way to find that balance of working with the younger generation. I think that would have been really, really powerful. And we kind of just missed a moment to do that. I still recommend this book when no one is watching. It is an interesting thriller. It also kind of reminds me of books like that. Now, there's some books I didn't enjoy that kind of reminds me of with that similar premise of being in a space where people are coming in and trying to take advantage of it. So I would still recommend this book. But at the same time, if I understand if someone's more, even more critical of it than I am, and they don't enjoy it. But if you just want a simple kind of, if you want a thriller that's got a little bit of heat to it, a little romance in there, a little spice, but very little spice, but enough to that it's going to be enough of a thriller to keep you interested the whole way through to see how everything unfolds. So check out Alyssa Cole's When No One Is Watching. Now, next we're going to talk about these two haunted house novels, literary horror and more classic horror in the way that it's the story's told, but both great books I think you should check out, and we'll get into that next. Okay, so we're back and we're talking about The Place Where They Buried Her Heart by Christina Henry. Now, this book has a lot going on, and I enjoyed this. The last book I read by her, I cannot remember the name of it, but it's like a boy gets a job, or it might be the mom. I think either way, the mom and the boy end up working for this old filmmaker, and it's again kind of like haunted house, a discovery of truth kind of story. It was okay, but this one I enjoyed a lot more. So I'll read the little insert here so you guys see, like, I actually really like this insert because sometimes with books, like, they tell you too much on the side panel. This one did a good job of keeping it kind of, you know, not too crazy. Okay, it says, "It was only a dare. On an otherwise ordinary street in Chicago, there's a house, an abandoned house where once upon a time, terrible things happened. The children who lived on this block are told by their parents to stay away from that house. But of course, children don't listen. Children think it's fun to be scared, to dare each other to go inside. Jessie Campanelli did what many older sisters do and dared her little brother Paul. But unlike all the other kids who went inside that abandoned house, Paul didn't return. His two friends, Jake and Richie, said that the house ate Paul. Of course, adults didn't believe that. Adults never believe what kids say. They thought someone kidnapped Paul or hurt him. They thought Paul had vanished in a way that was ordinary, explainable. The disappearance of her little brother broke Jessie's family apart in ways that would never be repaired. Jessie grew up, had a child of her own, and kept living on the same street where the house that ate her brother sat, crouched and waiting. And darkness seemed to spread out from that house, a darkness that was alive and hungry." Okay, so just as it said, haunted house story. There's a creepy house on the street. Everyone knows not to go there. Of course, like they said, kids gonna be kids, kids gonna kid, and they dare each other to go in there. Oh, go touch the door, touch the steps, whatever. One day, and this is kind of why I like how this book kind of starts. It's all on a dare. It's Jessie and the guilt that she's lived with for knowing that she's the one who dared her brother to go into this house, and trying to process all that she's feeling because of that, and then connecting that to the modern space where she's having issues with her own with her daughter and parenting and trying to show for her daughter while not really fully recovering and healing from all that happened with her brother and having to eventually resolve that, right? And why I think this book also really works is because it is a haunted house story. It's a house that's its own character in the book. It is hungry. It is vicious. It's not always selective of who it eats, but it is selective of who it calls to, of who it is haunting. And so I think that's what is just like chef's kiss here, along with the fact that we're still getting a lot of personal background in the story too. There's a lot going on with Jessie. We kind of follow her throughout time as we see her family kind of just like literally disappear. Her family is just falling apart in front of her face. And a large part of this book is also the recognition of the child that's left behind, right? The child who one has their own guilt about this and hasn't fully been able to ever communicate that to her parents, and is there sitting in the grief with them, and yet they're all experiencing their grief in different ways, the three of them, her mom, her dad, and herself. So the first person that we see go from her family is her father, in an attempt to burn down the house, an attempt to destroy what he deems as this dangerous and unsafe space. And the way that it calls to him and calls them in different ways, whether that's through rage, whether that's through curiosity, right? Or just an unbearable weight and pain. And so we see him being the first to go, right? Then we see the mom, who again called to the house, haunted by the grief of her son, kind of literally after the loss of her husband as well, deteriorates. And then Jessie is there to witness all of this and the ways that her and her mom kind of continue to bat heads, continue to go against each other. And
the mom's own way of kind of distancing herself from Jesse. Maybe that's out of the fear of losing her as well, but out of also the pain of maybe feeling that Jesse, not that she ever says this, but Jesse being the older one, the teen of the situation, this kind of angst that she has, and this discomfort existing with her mother, who she feels like doesn't see her, and oftentimes doesn't really communicate with her in a way that she feels like she even wants to see her, right? So there's that. And then how that ultimately shapes Jesse growing up, her relationships. We see that the trauma around her, and that she's kind of acting out at school, and then how that draws her in to meet who ends up being her baby daddy, her child's father, and then the fallout between them. And we kind of see how Jesse is growing up. She begins to build these rigid and strict lines around herself as well, and for the things that she does and does not allow. So when they have this kids together, and she's already kind of feeling like, I don't know if I can really trust this man to have a kid, and I don't know, but fine, he said he's going to change. Fine, he said this. She ends up building this really strong relationship with his father, and he's still in the community and helping her out. But when this man starts selling drugs, doing things because they need money, and if she feels like he's only going to resort to the worst things of himself to make money, and it's always an excuse with him. So she has no problem cutting off access from their child for this man because of where she sees his path is going. I also think there's an intricate relationship between the baby daddy and his father, and him feeling like at a young age telling him, don't waste this relationship with this girl can be really good for you, because he sees the potential in Jesse, and he sees how she shows up as a mom and as a partner. But he can also, and this is like I think the truth of being a parent, and seeing your child for what they are. And that doesn't always mean a bad thing. Sometimes it can mean seeing your child for the genius they are, for the prodigy they are, for the sweet person they are, for the caring nature they have. But it can also mean recognizing that no matter the tools you give this child, there's other things outside your control that have played a part in shaping who they want to be and who they're trying to be. And who they're trying to be could also be a person that is deeply troubled, someone that will always find themselves in a rut, and helping them out will only do but so much in teaching them to actually be able actually be able to grow within themselves and for themselves. And I think that character as a parent and what they represent is really strong, and kind of owning up to that and saying, I've tried to do all I could. And I think that's why he latches so quickly to Jesse, not only because now he's a grandparent, but he knows that in giving help to Jesse, she'll actually make something of it. So one of the other relationships in this book is that of Jesse and Richie. Or is it Jake? One of the kids moves away, like he gets fucked up, and he moves away. His parents are like, we're out of here, right? I get that. I understand that. But the other boy that she ends up kind of building this relationship, I think is really, or something very wholesome and like sweet about this relationship, because he is a survivor. He made it out the night that her brother did not. And he's able to talk with her. And sorry, y'all, there's someone outside. I'm like, whenever people have dogs outside, they do a terrible job of picking up after their dogs. And I always have to be like, pick up after your dog. I yell at the window. And then they're like, ooh, the thing that got caught on camera, right? Anyways, trifling people. But besides the point, that relationship between her and her brother's friend, we see grow over time as this person gets older, and she's like, it's almost like being able to watch her brother grow in a way that she knows that he can't. There's also this heavy presence of haunting that exists on every page. Even when you're not talking about the house, there's an eerie presence lurking from every exchange we see, from the loss of the father, the loss of the mother. There are these very just lingering feelings where you can still feel the presence of the grief throughout the entire book. So this book is really a story of grief, and not necessarily overcoming it, but learning how to combat that, whether that's combating it with friends and family and support of processing your grief, right? So seeing that relationship with his friend plays a huge part in that. It allows her to still grieve for her brother, but see the potential and building this new part, this almost, sibling relationship with someone that was so close to him. And some might say that's like a little toxic, but I think it's so beautifully executed here, and you see the beauty in it, you see the necessity in it, and the ways that she can kind of protect him, and the way that he can show up for her. And also it's a reflection to the fact that even though he's younger than you, even though he's your brother's friend and your brother as well, you dared him to go in here, he could have said no. That there was always some onus on her brother, and not to say it's his fault, but to say that he is still his own person, in a way that you kind of can forget when you're blaming yourself for something. You forget that this person also was enough. They were able to make their own decisions. And I think that having that relationship with his friend really allows her to see that, in the fact that this boy he's grown up and he makes his own decisions. He was making his own decisions then. That in that house, in that moment, she's able to hear directly from him that, you know, it didn't matter what you dared him to go there, but he could have said no. He still went. But we didn't have to go as far in the house as we did. We didn't have to do this. We were always going to do these things because that's our nature. And so, and not their nature in a bad way, but, you know, they're young boys, they're kids, they're gonna explore. You dare them to do something, they don't have to do it. They did it anyways. He literally brought his two friends along for proof that he went there, and so that he wasn't alone in the process. And so I think there's some kind of feeling of not necessarily relief, but it's almost like, yes, there's a sense of anguish in knowing that he died alone, but at that moment he wasn't alone when he was exploring that house, and that there was two people there who were trying to fight for him in some way, shape, or form, amongst their own fear and confusion, while being in that space that is manipulating it. It's manipulating how you view it and how it's formed to make you fall prey to, you know, its hunger. I think the larger question here also tackles, you know, the fear of having this kind of entity that preys on fear. Sorry, this is the garage. This is why I changed my setting. I was downstairs, I came upstairs, there's more people in the house. But anyways, it preys on that fear that you have. It preys on your grief. It preys on the ability of knowing that it can consume you in more than one way. And I think that's what was also done really well here too. And that ultimately takes us to the end of the story, where, you know, we have to see her reconcile with the fact that there's been so many parts of her past and her relationship with her brother that she's keeping from her daughter, and her daughter's discovery of these things, and how her daughter was feeling very distant from her, kind of similar to how she felt about her mom, and having to now recognize that maybe keeping these things secret was not a good idea, and how to rebuild this relationship with her daughter on not necessarily the back of the trauma that she has with her brother, but through learning that sometimes there's things that you have to share, and not really sometimes, most times, all times, there's things that you have to share with your children if you want them to grow, if you want them to be protected, and that protecting them isn't just a one-man job. It takes community, it takes friendships, it takes really, in this sense, a neighborhood, because it's not just her, it's not even just her, her father-in-law, but there's other people in the neighborhood too who have stayed there, and they become part of the same space, and feeling the hurt and pain of this community, and specifically of this house. And I think in a community like this, where you may already feel like you're going crazy, you may already feel like there's no hope left, characters on people like that are so necessary, because they're seeing the same thing you're seeing, and yet they're still there to welcome you and comfort you, and eventually fight for you and fight with you to take down that thing. So I just really enjoyed The Place Where They Buried Your Heart. I think there's a lot of conversations you can have about it, whether that's about sibling dynamics, even the relationship of like parenting, parenthood, and how sometimes the parent that shows up, that can't show up for their own kid, is able to show up for someone else's. And then once again, community seems to be a common thread here, but the neighborhood itself and the people within it, even the people who choose to leave it, and that lingering presence here, that eerie presence, that there's this level of melancholy that kind of exists in a place, and will always exist in a place when something isn't fully healed. So yeah, I definitely recommend checking this out, The Place Where They Buried Your Heart by Christina Henry. I'm happy that I read this after reading the other book. I think it's called The House Where Horror Was Built, or The House Where... It's something like that. But I'm happy I read this after it, because I think this is just a better one. But I look forward to seeing what else this author puts out, because it seems like... I love when you see an author's work, and it seems like they're kind of going on this track of just getting stronger and stronger. So I like this one a lot. And I hope you guys give it a chance too. All right, so now we're going to talk about The Devil is Fine by John Bircher. Let me cue that up for y'all. Okay, so now we have The Devil is Fine by John Bircher. This was a surprise for me. It's, I would say, literary horror, but not really even horror, literary thriller and historical fiction a little bit. You are following a man who is kind of just, I think, leaving his son's funeral, and now he has panic attacks. It's not really revealed to you until later, and I won't take away some of that for you guys, the reading experience, but I will say, he is struggling, right, in multitude of ways. I think this is one of those books where you have a character who you're like, you really don't care for at first. You're learning all these things about him. You're hearing the conversations, how he communicates to people, and it's just like word vomit sometimes. He's talking, and he sounds like he's talking out his ass. Like, he's rude, he's disconnected, he's kind of distancing himself, sarcastic, and
now what he was recovering from, he has a drinking problem, and from the loss of his son and then all the other things going on around him, he starts to drink again. And we see the way that that kind of piles on to this element of magic realism in the book, where, you know, now we're talking about spirits and being haunted, and um being haunted by the ghost of his, you know, estranged grandfather, who passed down, because mind you, this big whole story is about the fact that this estranged grandfather passed down a house to his son. His son is now dead, so he inherits it. And it is come to the realization that this house, which he was planning to just go there, it's like on a coastal town, was planning to go there and just get rid of the house, sell it, and be done with it, because he has no positive connection with this grandfather. He is, by the way, a biracial black man, um, who married a white woman who, again, never had a positive, well, not white woman, he married a black woman. And how he just had the white, his white mother and him have always had this disconnect of information that she's held from him. And again, it kind of goes to show that, you know, even in marrying someone who was black and knowing how historically important this property was, she kept this a secret from her, really to protect her own peace, not the peace of her son and her child. So when he inherits this land and realizes, like, why would he give this to him? And then discovers it's a plantation, because they have to do a soil test. You know, whenever you're going to sell a property, they test all different kinds of things, right? Inspections are done. And through this inspection, find not one, but like multiple bodies there of West Africans, and acknowledging that this was a plantation. And now he's kind of built some friends in the community, the local like bar and inn owner. The person who also tends to be his realtor is like the one who runs the bar, building a relationship with her, which started off rocky. And then the guy who's always in the bar, and then how he kind of becomes that guy always in the bar, and these things are going on with him, and he's losing grip of reality. But here she is to kind of not necessarily hold critique, because she does, she's very honest with him, which I love. He's a writer as well. He's a literary professor, and she's has no problem telling him about himself, his book, like what she really feels. And I think he really needs that in this time where he thinks people are kind of handling him with sensitive gloves or avoiding him because of the loss of his son. And having people around him like that help him to process and navigate not only his grief, but his lack of identity. And having people around him that are so certain and sure of themselves, you know, it's interesting to kind of think about how the book progresses, and what people love to kind of see discussed in books so often. These background characters can almost seem as not as interesting because they figure themselves out, but it's so intentional to have them be the contrast to our main character, who eventually has to get to a point where his story is not this same story that people are drawn to because of the trauma and the uncertainty of it, but because he is so now confirmed about who he is and who he wants to be. And also the jealousy he had because his son was very certain of who he wanted to be, very certain in his existence and his black identity, that he struggled so much with himself that there was a jealousy of his son. There was a jealousy of how his son was able to step into that. And I think even a misunderstanding of how his son, and being a child of his, could have something that he himself did lacked, and lacked the ability to get to. And only in his son's passing and inheriting this place was he able to get to that place where he was able to see his son and recognize his son for all that he was. And it's unfortunate, right? This is a large part of this book too, is hindsight, right? Being able to reflect on things because they've already happened, and not being, instead of being able to process them when they are. So in collective, this book feels like this letter to his son and his son's passing, and the guilt that he feels, and communicating the things to his son that he wishes he could have communicated when he was alive, and exposing the tumultuous relationship they had until his son's passing, and his you know, son's untimely death. Um, we also see the relationship between him and his wife, ex-wife, baby mother, whatever, and how that kind of fell apart in the ways that she still is able to show up for him, because there is a love there, but there's also a large bit of loss, not only of losing her son, but knowing the trouble that they were having to build and strengthen their relationship, and essentially in some ways almost feeling she had to choose her son over her husband at the time. And then being able to still see him and know that there is part of him there, there's a part of the man that she loved there, and show up for him when she knows he needs it. And again, this another book that kind of talks about community and the people you keep community with and how they can help you, but is ultimately about the way that grief is so unraveling when it's not processed, and how this connects back to him making this discovery, inheriting this land, and wanting to figure out what to do with it. And again, how he is starting to be kind of overcome with these visions. He's hallucinating. He's losing his memory and having these time gaps where he's waking up and he's being drawn to the very ocean that he is so afraid of, and he was so afraid of as a child because of a experience he had with a jellyfish. And I think the correlation, at least for me, how I took it, when I love jellyfish, they're one of my favorite animals, which maybe seem weird, but how they really are stinging out of protection, right? When you're getting stung by them, it's a mechanism to protect you. It's not just to hurt you. And how much of the jellyfish is so fluid and just floating in the water, and because of its sometimes driftedness, it can end up on the shore. So I think it's really interesting to see his relationship with water, um, and then also thinking of the relationship of water as a transport that brought people over to, brought enslaved people over to this place where they were beaten and tortured. And that's not discussed lightly in this book. You're getting the visions of him and his white ancestor, and the torture and the things that they executed and that they did, and having to confront the fact that you have that in your history, is another layer of the conversation. And then also navigating the fact that there's other things speaking out to you, and they aren't these bad, evil, and spirits, but they're reaching out to you to kind of help you navigate what justice could look like. And so when then you see people come in, and I think this is another interesting part of the book, where it's first discovered that the bodies are there, and then you have a local like news anchor who comes in and wants to report on it. And I think we kind of start, this is where you really start to see the start of him unraveling, because he has this moment where he's just like telling her, leave him alone, like, I don't want to discuss this. And then she's like, well, let's get ahead of it. Don't you want to get ahead of it? And has to feel to be a black man that owned the plantation, like now owns a plantation. And you feel this pressure from him where he's starting to kind of like get overwhelmed and essentially lose grip of his sense of reality, and sees her as this attacking force. I think he like shoves her, if I remember, he like pushes her or something to get away from him. And now that then becomes, it's interesting to see how quickly um, he's been kind of sliding under the radar, not only because of his fame of being an author, but he slides under the radar with his own identity and where he stands on things. But in this moment, he's cast the same way so many black men are cast, as being aggressive, as being rude, and lacking of care for this white reporter who is trying to just use all that's happening, the trauma of his experience of all this going on, that he isn't fully able to process yet, for content, for material to put out there on the news, and to be the first to get ahead of it. And I think similarly, actually, from this book to other stories here, there's a conversation again of how something that is so traumatic, something that's so horrendous and horrific, is ended up used to kind of profit from. So even when we see in the story that the museum decides that they want to excavate and take the bones off of the property, and they kind of will go about it however they want to, and him kind of losing time, him losing his ability to kind of stay in the one space, like literally hallucinating and losing his sense of self, can ultimately help him to rediscover who he is. The ending is a little weird. I don't want to spoil that for you at all. It's definitely kind of one of those endings where you're like, did that happen? Or is this like a metaphor for something else? Um, which I'm okay if it happened, because that leads perfectly with more like literary horror, body horror, or the thrill or suspense of a little bit of sci-fi. Like it dips its toe in so many other things. But even if it's a metaphor for something, it could be a metaphor for a transition into a new form of yourself that's a little bit more fluid, that's not as rigid, a little bit more open and willing to face its own fears. Sorry, y'all. I'm gonna have to cut that. Go back and cut it out. Sorry, y'all. I was interrupted, and I even lost my train of thought just now. This is why I try to record when no one's in the house, because when people are home, like whether it's my parents in and out, my sister, my friends, family, people coming in and out the house all the time. My nieces are always over, so it's like, you want to be present. So I try to film everything at one time so I can just go and be part of the family and the activities and the chillness of it all. But yeah, people gonna people, right? Family gonna family. Regardless, yeah. Like I kind of lost what I was saying, but there's a point in this book where you're asking, what does justice look like for the people you hurt, and not to say he directly hurt them, but even justice for his son who he has hurt, and what does that look like to have his story be told, and what does it look like for the people that have been found on the property that your ancestors were a part of, um, you know, brutally, I mean, literally the viciousness of slavery, that they were a part of that. And discovering through your own journey of trying to maybe protect those remains and get them to back to the home that they should be in, and what it is to truly come home, even if it's a home you don't recognize as your own. So The Devil is Fine for me was a really interesting and engaging read. I would say if you're someone who likes literary fiction and you want to maybe tap into something that's a little bit more, because it is very literary. It's written in a way that feels very lyrical. I mean, the writing is off the charts to me in this book. I had the audiobook, and some people didn't like it because it was switching in tone and like an audio, like the volume of it all. But I actually enjoyed it. I think it really played into the fact that this man is literally losing his mind at times. Um, but I think if you're someone who likes literary fiction and that kind of style of writing, um, then you'll enjoy this because it dips a toe in so many other genres. I think it is cast as literary horror, but it occupies space in so many realms. I think a lot of people who enjoy literary fiction would really eat this up. And there's also this healthy balance. I'm not someone who loves literary fiction all the time. It has to be the right space, right book, right time, right mood. But I think what this does really well is even though it is written in such a way, there is still this beautiful way of how the dialogue exists and feels so cohesive and natural. So it's not literary fiction the way you feel like it's being pompous or trying so hard to be this elevated form of writing. It just feels, again, it just flows so cohesively. So I recommend The Devil is Fine by John Bircher. If you've never seen it or heard of it, or maybe you have and you have thoughts, please let me know. But I really enjoyed this more than I thought I was going to. And that's just not saying anything bad. It sounded interesting when I read the panel. But I think more than anything, with literary fiction, I always had a little bit of a guard up, and this just clocked me. It clocked my feet. It said, "Oh, you like me? Don't deny it." There's also something in the back here that says by an author here from another book I think you should read, and that's "We Cast a Shadow" by Maurice Carlos Ruffin. If you read that book, and you have to read this one. You read this book, you have to read that one. There's so many interesting things within Recast a Shadow that talk about like the relationship between father and son, racial identity. Oh, they're so good. Like things that you cannot, that you think you're protecting your child from, you're not really protecting them from. You're protecting yourself. And so if you read this one and like it, read We Cast a Shadow. Please do. That's all I have to say. Those are the 4 books I have here. Sorry for all the pauses and stops and goings and here and there, but definitely check these titles out. Happy reading.